The first time I knocked on the door of 247 Santos Dumont Street, I was in uniform and ready to lay down the law. As a cop for 15 years, I'd already handled hundreds of noise complaints, and this loud party was just going to be another routine report on my sheet. But when the door opened and those brown eyes stared at me with a mix of surprise and defiance, something inside my chest crumbled like a building being demolished. I'm Vincent Hayes, 38, and this is the story of how my whole life changed because of a 22-year-old kid who didn't even know the power he had. If you want to find out how a single look can change a whole life, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. My name is Vincent Hayes, and for 15 years, the only thing that defined me was this blue uniform I wear every day. A cop from the 12th Precinct, a community patrol specialist, married to Sarah for 12 years, living at 246 Santos Dumont Street. My life has always been measured in protocols, fixed schedules, and standardized procedures. I wake up at 5 in the morning, do 40 push-ups, drink black coffee with no sugar, kiss Sarah on the forehead, and head out for another day of keeping the peace. Santos Dumont Street is exactly the kind of place people like me choose to live. Two-story houses with perfect lawns, wide sidewalks where kids ride bikes without a worry, and neighbors who give a cordial nod but keep a respectful distance. It's a neighborhood where nothing out of the ordinary ever happens, and I liked it that way. Or at least I thought I did. My routine was as predictable as a Swiss watch. Morning patrol on the residential streets, lunch at the station, afternoons handling minor incidents, back home at 6 sharp for dinner with Sarah. Weekends were for mowing the lawn, washing the car, and watching games on TV. Sarah worked as a nurse at the municipal hospital and shared my preference for an organized, uneventful life. What you hear here is just the beginning. The full stories, unedited and with all the details you can imagine, are available now. Check the link in the description right now. I met Sarah at the police academy when she was still studying nursing. We fell in love with the stability we found in each other. She needed security after a rough childhood. I needed someone who understood the irregular hours and stress of the job. Our marriage was always solid, built on practical foundations and genuine companionship. It wasn't the fiery passion of romantic movies, but it was real and comfortable. On weekends, I liked to sit on the front porch with a cold beer, watching the quiet movement of the neighborhood. The sound of lawnmowers created a suburban symphony, mixed with the laughter of kids playing and the occasional dog bark. Sarah would usually join me after watering her flowers, and we'd talk about work, plans to renovate the kitchen, or just sit in comfortable silence. It was one Saturday afternoon that I noticed the activity at the house across the street. A new family was moving in. A dad, a mom, and a tall young guy with brown hair who was carrying boxes with impressive ease. I watched discreetly as they arranged furniture in the garage, noticing how the guy laughed loudly at his dad's jokes, and how he helped his mom with a gentle care. There was something about him that caught my attention, a vibrant energy that contrasted with the reserved atmosphere of our neighborhood. Over the next few weeks, I started to notice more details about our new neighbors. The dad left for work early in a black sedan. The mom tended a small herb garden on the side of the house, and the young guy, who I found out was named Jason, took the bus every morning carrying a heavy backpack of books. A college student, obviously. He had that laid-back vibe typical of someone who still believes they can conquer the world. Sarah commented a few times on how polite they were, always saying hi when they met at the mailbox. "The guy is studying engineering," she told me one night at dinner. His mom told me he's very dedicated to his studies. I just nodded, faking casual interest. But for some reason I couldn't explain, I filed that information away. My daily patrols started to include more frequent drives down Santos Dumont Street. Nothing outside of protocol, just a conscientious cop making sure his own neighborhood was safe. But if I sometimes slowed down when I passed by number 247, or if my eyes automatically looked for Jason's figure at the bus stop, they were just unimportant coincidences. It was on a Friday night that everything started to spiral out of control. I was finishing my shift when I got a call from Mrs. Patterson, our oldest and most notoriously cranky neighbor. "Officer Hayes, you need to do something about this racket at the new house." Loud music, a bunch of people yelling, "It's out of hand." I sighed, turning off the radio in the patrol car. Another college party that needed to be shut down. It happened every weekend somewhere in the neighborhood, always the same routine. Young people thinking they can turn residential areas into nightclubs. I drove to Santos Dumont Street, already mentally preparing my standard speech about disturbing the peace and respecting neighbors. The music really was loud, some modern stuff with a lot of bass that vibrated even inside the car. Colorful lights flashed through the windows of 247, and I could see the silhouettes of people chatting excitedly through the curtains. I parked out front and took a deep breath, adjusting my utility belt and making sure my badge was clearly visible. Just another routine incident. I walked up to the front door, noticing how the music got louder with every step. There was laughter coming from the backyard, and the smell of hamburgers on the grill mixed with beer. A typical college party, nothing I hadn't seen 100 times before. I knocked on the door hard enough to be heard over the music, using the 3 firm knocks they taught us at the academy. For a few seconds nothing happened. Then the music dropped slightly, and I heard footsteps approaching. The door opened, and it was like all the air was instantly sucked out of my lungs. Jason was standing there in front of me, wearing a blue t-shirt that made the color of his eyes pop, and jeans that fit him perfectly. His hair was slightly messy, like he'd just run his fingers through it, and there was a light sheen of sweat on his forehead that made him look even younger. But it was his eyes that caught me off guard, brown with little golden flecks, staring at me with a mix of surprise, curiosity, and something else I couldn't identify at that moment. "Oh," he said, blinking a few times as if he was trying to process my presence. "Hi, officer." My mouth suddenly went dry, and for one terrible moment I completely forgot why I was there. There was something about this kid that scrambled all my organized thoughts, like someone had jumbled the files in my head. I managed to pull myself together, just enough to assume my professional posture. "The music is too loud," I managed to say, surprised at how my voice came out rougher than normal. "We have neighbors who work early tomorrow." Jason ran a hand through his hair, the gesture I had pictured seconds before, and nodded quickly. "Right. Sorry. I didn't realize it was a problem. I'll turn it down right now." He turned to yell something to his friends inside, and I used those few seconds to try and understand what was happening to me. In 15 years on the job, I had never had a reaction like this during an incident. My heart was beating faster than usual. My palms were sweaty, and there was a strange feeling in my stomach I couldn't explain. When Jason turned back to me, the music was already significantly lower. "Better?" he asked, and there was something about the way he looked at me that made it feel like the question had deeper layers. "Much better," I replied, aware that I should be leaving, but unable to make my feet move. "You're Jason, right?" "I live right across the street." I pointed to my house, number 246. His eyes followed my indication and then returned to my face with a smile that made something inside my chest tighten. "Vincent Hayes," he said, and hearing my name on his lips triggered a reaction that scared me. "My mom mentioned you. Said you've been a cop for a long time." 15 years, I confirmed, wondering how his mom knew that. "Sarah probably mentioned it during a chat at the mailbox." "And you're studying engineering?" "Last year," he replied, leaning on the doorframe in a way that made the muscles in his arm look more defined under the t-shirt. "Civil. I plan to specialize in structures." There was something hypnotic about the way he talked, gesturing slightly with his hands to emphasize important points. I realized I was paying more attention to the movements of his lips than to the actual words, and this deeply alarmed me. "That's a good field," I commented, trying to keep the conversation in safe territory. "There's always demand for engineers." "I hope so," Jason laughed, and the sound made something in my ribcage vibrate. My parents keep reminding me of that every time I complain about the tough courses. From the back of the house came voices calling his name, probably his friends wanting to know who was at the door. Jason looked over his shoulder and then back at me. "Well, thanks for not being too hard on me about the music. I promise we'll keep it at a respectable volume." I nodded, knowing it was time to leave but reluctant to end our first real conversation. "Just make sure not to bother the neighbors, especially Mrs. Patterson. She doesn't have a lot of patience for noise." "Noted." Jason smiled again, and there was a complicity in that smile that made me feel like we were sharing some secret. "Good night, Officer Hayes." "Good night, Jason." I walked back to the patrol car with measured steps, fighting the urge to look back. It was only when I was inside the car, with the doors closed and the engine running, that I allowed myself to process what had just happened. My hand was shaking slightly as I picked up the radio to report that the incident was resolved. On the drive back home, I tried to rationalize the experience. Jason was an attractive kid. That was an objective fact. Anyone would recognize that. The problem was that I shouldn't be having those kinds of thoughts about a 22-year-old neighbor, especially as a married man and a respected cop in the community. When I got home, Sarah was in the kitchen making pre-bed tea. "How was work today?" she asked, just as she always did. "Normal," I replied, hanging my bulletproof vest in the hall closet. "Just a noise complaint at the new house." "The Millers?" Sarah frowned. "They don't seem like the type to cause problems." "Just a college party." The kid was pretty polite, Turned the music down right away. Sarah nodded, satisfied, and turned her attention back to the tea. I went up to the bedroom, saying I needed to shower, but really I wanted a few minutes to organize my thoughts. Under the hot shower water, I closed my eyes and tried to forget the way Jason had looked at me, how his voice sounded, how that smile had made something impossible happen inside me. But even hours later, lying in bed next to Sarah, I could still feel the echo of that strange sensation in my chest. And the last thing I saw before I fell asleep was the pair of brown eyes with golden flecks, staring at me with an intensity that questioned everything I thought I knew about myself. In the following days, I tried to resume my normal routine as if nothing had happened. Wake up, push-ups, coffee, a kiss on Sarah's forehead, patrol. But something fundamental had changed, even if I was reluctant to admit it. My eyes automatically sought out the house at 2:47 during my rounds, and I felt an inexplicable disappointment when I didn't see Jason at the bus stop or helping his mom in the garden. It was on a sweltering Tuesday that I saw him for the first time since the party. I was at the supermarket buying ingredients for dinner when I spotted him in the cereal aisle, intensely studying the granola options as if it were the most important decision in the world. He was wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans, but there was something about the way he moved that made him seem different from everyone else there. My first instinct was to leave before he saw me, but my feet refused to cooperate. Instead, I found myself walking toward him, pretending to be interested in the products on the adjacent shelf. "Officer Hayes?" His voice made me look his way, as if I had been surprised. "Jason," I replied, trying to sound casual. "Shopping for your mom?" He laughed, holding up a cereal box. "Actually trying to figure out which of these options will keep me awake during morning classes without breaking the bank." "Student on a tight budget?" I asked, and immediately regretted the familiarity of the comment. "You know the drill," Jason smiled. "I work part-time at an electronics store, but most of it goes to tuition and books." There was something about the way he shared these personal details that made me feel like I was more than just the neighborhood cop. Like we were friends. The thought made me uncomfortable and curiously satisfied at the same time. "What kind of electronics store?" I heard myself asking. "Tech hub at the mall. Nothing too glamorous. I mostly help customers choose cables and chargers." Jason laughed again. "But the hours are flexible, so I can fit it in around classes." I nodded, genuinely impressed by his dedication. "Engineering and work must be a lot." "Sometimes," he admitted, finally putting a box of granola in his cart. "But my parents have sacrificed a lot to give me this opportunity. It's the least I can do." There was a maturity in those words that contrasted with his youthful appearance, and I felt an unexpected admiration growing inside me. Here was a kid who understood responsibility and hard work, values that had always been important in my life. "That's admirable," I said sincerely. "Not all college students have that perspective." Jason looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. "You talk like you know a lot of college students." "Well, not really," I admitted, realizing how my comment had sounded presumptuous. "Just assumptions based on the incidents I respond to." "Ah, right. Loud parties and stuff like that." Jason smiled, and there was a gentle teasing in his voice. "Exactly," I replied, feeling my lips curve into something resembling a smile. We stood in silence for a few seconds, and I realized we were looking at each other in a way that went beyond casual neighborly courtesy. Something was being communicated in that moment, something neither of us seemed willing to name. "Well," Jason broke the silence, "I better finish up my shopping before the store closes. I have a shift tonight." "Of course," I nodded quickly. "It was good to see you, Jason." "You too, Officer Hayes." As I watched him walk away down the aisle, I wondered why I hadn't asked him to just call me Vincent, and why I was hoping our paths would cross again soon. 3 weeks passed since our meeting at the supermarket, and I was starting to think I had imagined all that tension between us. My life went back to its normal rhythm. Patrols, reports, dinner with Sarah, TV. But even on the most routine nights, when I was sitting on the porch, my eyes would invariably drift to the house at 2:47, looking for any sign of movement. It was on a suffocating July Thursday that everything finally changed. The air conditioning at the station had broken down, leaving all of us annoyed and sweaty during the shift. I decided to do an extra round of the neighborhood before going home, taking advantage of the night breeze to cool off a bit. It was almost midnight when I turned onto Santos Dumont Street, with the patrol car windows down and the radio on low. The street was completely deserted, with only a few porch lights on, creating small islands of light in the darkness. That's when I saw a solitary figure walking slowly down the sidewalk, hands in his pockets and head down. Even in the gloom, I immediately recognized his build and way of walking. It was Jason. I slowed down, watching him for a few seconds before deciding to stop. There was something about his posture that worried me. His shoulders were slumped, his steps slow and heavy. It didn't look like the energetic walk of someone exercising at night, but rather of a person carrying the weight of some concern. I parked the patrol car a few feet ahead of him and got out, closing the door softly so as not to make too much noise in the quiet of the night. When Jason looked up and saw me, I could see the surprise in his eyes, followed by what seemed like relief. "Vincent," he said, using my first name for the first time. The sound of my civilian identity on his lips created an instant intimacy that caught me off guard. "Can't sleep?" I asked, walking toward him. The distance between us shrank with every step, and I felt the familiar racing of my pulse that his presence always provoked. "Just got off work. Double shift at the store," Jason explained, running a hand through his hair in a gesture I had already learned to recognize as a sign of tiredness or nervousness. When I got home, I couldn't relax. "Sometimes walking helps clear my head." I nodded, understanding the feeling perfectly. "I do the same thing after some tough shifts. Is something specific bothering you?" Jason hesitated, as if he was deciding how much he could share. In that moment, under the soft light of the streetlights, I could see the lines of fatigue around his eyes and the tension in his neck muscles. "My parents," he said finally. "They keep pressuring me about the future, about a job after graduation, about other things." The way he said "other things" carried a weight that suggested deeper issues than academic problems. There was a vulnerability in his voice that awakened a protective instinct in me that I didn't know I had. "Want to talk about it?" I heard myself offering. "Sometimes talking to someone outside the situation can help." Jason looked at me with an expression that mixed gratitude and something more complex. "You really want to hear the problems of an insomniac college student?" "I have all night," I replied, realizing it was completely true. There was nothing in the world I would rather be doing at that moment. We walked to a small park at the end of the street, where there were a few benches under a leafy tree that shielded us from the direct light of the streetlights. Jason sat down first, leaving enough space between us to maintain respectability, but not so much that it prevented a sense of closeness. "My parents are great people," he began, looking at his hands clasped in his lap. "They've worked hard their whole lives to give me opportunities they never had. My dad's an accountant, my mom's an elementary school teacher. Simple, honest people who believe in doing things the right way." There was genuine love in his voice when he talked about his parents, but also a weight that suggested expectations that were hard to carry. "They have plans for me," Jason continued. "Graduation, a job at a good company, getting married to a nice girl, grandkids for them to spoil. The classic American dream, you know?" I nodded, starting to understand where the conflict lay. "And you don't want the same things?" Jason laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "That's the thing. I don't know what I want, or rather, I'm starting to figure it out, and I'm not sure if they'll like it." The silence stretched between us for a few moments, filled only with the sounds of the night. Crickets chirping, the distant hum of some air conditioner, the occasional car passing on the main street. "Did you always know what you wanted?" Jason asked, looking directly at me for the first time since we started talking. The question caught me off guard. "I thought I did," I replied honestly. "I wanted stability, respect, a predictable life. I got all that." "But," he insisted, catching the hesitation in my voice. "But sometimes I wonder if stability and satisfaction are the same thing," I admitted, surprised by my own honesty. I had never verbalized that doubt to anyone, not even to myself. Jason nodded as if he understood perfectly. "Exactly. What if you find out that what makes you happy isn't what's supposed to make you happy?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications that neither of us seemed ready to fully explore. But there was something in the way he phrased it that made me suspect we weren't just talking in abstract terms. "Jason," I began, choosing my words carefully, "your mom came to me a few weeks ago. She was worried about you, said you seemed different lately." His eyes widened slightly. "She came to you?" "She asked me to keep an eye on you. Said that, as the neighborhood cop, I could make sure you didn't get into trouble." Jason ran a hand over his face, visibly embarrassed. "She didn't have to do that. I'm not a kid anymore." "I know," I replied quickly. "And I told her that. But I also promised I'd look out for you." The words came out more emotionally charged than I intended. Jason looked at me with an intensity that made my heart race dangerously. "Why did you agree?" he asked softly. It was a simple question that demanded an honest answer I wasn't prepared to give. "Because from the moment you opened the door that first night, something about you fascinated me in a way I can't explain. Because I think about you more than I should." Because when you smile, I feel like the world makes more sense. Because, I said finally, I think you deserve to have someone who cares. Jason was silent for a long moment, processing my response. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, almost a whisper. Vincent, can I ask you something personal? Sure. Are you happy? In your marriage? In your life? Are you genuinely happy? The question hit me like a punch to the stomach. Not because of the audacity. Jason had every right to ask personal questions after I'd offered to listen to his. It hit me because no one had ever directly asked me about my happiness, and realizing I didn't have a ready answer was unsettling. I'm content, I replied slowly. Sarah's a good wife. We have a stable life. We respect each other. That doesn't answer my question, Jason said gently. I looked at him, seeing a comprehension in his brown eyes that went far beyond his 22 years. There was something in that moment, the late hour, the intimacy of the conversation, the vulnerability we were both sharing, that made anything less than total honesty impossible. No, I admitted. I'm not happy. Not in the way I should be. Jason nodded as if he had already known the answer. And do you know why? The question hung between us like a bridge I could choose to cross or not. On the other side of that bridge was unknown, dangerous territory that could change everything. But looking at Jason, seeing the way the streetlight created soft shadows on his face, feeling the electric connection that always existed when we were together, I knew I had already made my choice weeks ago. Because, I said, my voice coming out huskier than normal, I'm starting to discover things about myself that I never allowed myself to explore. Jason leaned slightly toward me, and the movement brought with it the subtle scent of his shampoo mixed with something that was uniquely his. What kind of things? My mouth went dry. We were entering territory from which there would be no turning back, and we both knew it. But there was something in his eyes, an acceptance, a silent invitation, that made me continue. Things a married 38-year-old man shouldn't be feeling for a 22-year-old neighbor, I said, the words coming out in a whispered confession that sealed our fate. The silence that followed was charged with a tension so intense it seemed to have physical substance. Jason looked at me with an expression that mixed surprise, recognition, and something that might have been relief. Vincent, he said my name like a prayer. Jason, I shouldn't have said that. No. He shook his head quickly. Don't regret it. Please. We were sitting closer now, although neither of us was aware of when that happened. I could see the golden flecks in his eyes. Count every eyelash. Notice the way his lips parted slightly. I've been feeling things too, Jason confessed, his voice a whisper only I could hear. Ever since that first night, when you knocked on my door. I thought I was imagining it, that it was just admiration for someone older, more experienced. And now? Now I know it's something much more complicated than that. My hand moved almost independently of my will, finding his in the space between us. The contact was electric. Skin against skin, warmth against warmth. Two people recognizing a connection that went beyond logic or social convenience. Jason didn't pull his hand away. Instead, his fingers intertwined with mine, creating an intimacy that was both innocent and deeply loaded with meaning. This is crazy, I whispered. I know, he replied, but I can't stop thinking about you. Jason, don't say this is wrong, he interrupted me. Not now. Just for tonight, let it be real. I looked at our intertwined fingers, at his face lit by the moon, at the eyes that saw me in a way no one ever had. Vincent Hayes, the controlled cop, the respectable husband, the man who always knew exactly who he was and what he wanted, that man was disappearing, being replaced by someone I didn't recognize but who felt truer than any version of myself that had ever existed. I raised my free hand and gently touched his face, feeling his soft skin under my calloused fingers. Jason closed his eyes and leaned his face against my palm, in a gesture of surrender that made something inside my chest break for good. Vincent, he whispered my name against my skin, and it was like all the air was instantly sucked out of my lungs. I couldn't resist any longer. I leaned toward him, closing the last few inches that separated us, and pressed my lips against his in a kiss that contained weeks of repressed tension, years of unrecognized desires, and a passion that burned stronger than anything I had ever experienced. Jason responded immediately, his hands finding the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair. The kiss deepened naturally, becoming more urgent, more desperate, as if we both knew that this moment might be all we would ever have. When we finally separated, we were both breathing heavily. Jason rested his forehead against mine, and we stayed like that for long moments, processing what had just happened. "Oh my God," he whispered. "I didn't know I could feel this way." "Neither did I admitted, still tasting him on my lips, the scent of his skin lingering in my nostrils. We looked around, suddenly remembering where we were. The park was still deserted, but the reality of our situation began to seep through the fog of passion. I was a married cop, he was a college student, and we had just crossed a line that would change everything. "What do we do now?" Jason asked, his voice loaded with equal parts uncertainty and hope. I looked at him, at the face I had already memorized, at the eyes that saw me beyond all the masks I wore, at the lips that were still slightly swollen from our kiss, and I knew there was no turning back. "Now," I said, taking his hand again, "we find out how far this can take us." The smile that lit up his face was like the sunrise. Slow, warm, transformative. And in that moment, under the stars and the crescent moon, with the whole world sleeping around us, I felt as if my real life was finally beginning. 2 weeks passed since that night in the park, and our life had turned into a secret dance of furtive meetings and looks loaded with meaning. During the day, I maintained my professional routine, greeted Jason formally when we met on the street, and went home to have dinner with Sarah as if nothing had changed. But the nights were ours. We developed a non-verbal communication system. If the light in my bedroom was on after midnight, it meant Sarah was asleep, and it was safe for us to meet. Jason would wait in his backyard garage, and I would show up 5 minutes later, always in plain clothes, always with my heart racing like a teenager on a first date. Our meetings were intense and loaded with an urgency that came from the knowledge that we were living on borrowed time. We talked about everything: his plans after graduation, my frustrations with the police routine, philosophy, music, dreams we had never shared with anyone else. And in between the conversations, there were the kisses, each one more desperate than the last, as if we could completely merge through touch. It was on the third Friday that everything fell apart. I had left for our usual meeting, wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt, when I realized I had forgotten my wallet at home. I went back in silently through the back door, climbing the stairs without making a sound so as not to wake Sarah. That's when I heard her voice coming from the bedroom, talking on the phone with someone. "I know it sounds like paranoia, but something's different about Vincent lately," she was saying. "He goes out at night, says he can't sleep and needs to walk, but when he comes back, he has a different smell, like he's been near someone who wears a young perfume." My blood ran cold. I stopped in the hallway, leaning against the wall, listening to my wife share her suspicions with what I presumed was her sister. "No, I don't think it's another woman. Vincent's not that type of man. But something is going on, and I'm starting to get worried," Sarah continued. I grabbed my wallet silently and left the house with my heart racing for completely different reasons now. Jason was waiting for me in the garage, sitting on an old lawn chair with a smile that disappeared as soon as he saw my expression. "What happened?" he asked immediately. I told him about the conversation I had overheard, watching the color gradually drain from his face. "Sarah suspects," I finished. "She doesn't know what specifically, but she knows something has changed." Jason ran his hands through his hair, his familiar gesture of nervousness now loaded with panic. "What now? Do we stop seeing each other?" The question hung between us like a sharp blade. The logical, sensible answer was yes. We should stop before everything blew up and destroyed not only our lives, but also Sarah's and Jason's parents. It was the right thing to do. "I can't," I admitted, the brutal honesty coming out before I could censor it. "I know I should. I know it's the right thing, but I can't give up on you." Jason got up from the chair and walked to where I was, stopping so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Then don't give up," he whispered. "We'll find a way." It was at that moment that we heard the sound of a window opening in the house next door, Mrs. Patterson's house. We both froze, looking toward the sound, but it was too late to move away. The old lady was there, clearly watching us from her second-story window. "Shit," Jason whispered. "This isn't good," I agreed, knowing that Mrs. Patterson was known for spreading information through the neighborhood faster than a wildfire. We tried to act casual, as if we were just neighbors chatting about some trivial matter, but we both knew she had seen our closeness, the intimacy in our body language. "Good evening, Officer Hayes." Her voice cut through the night like a knife. "Working late?" "Just checking to make sure everything's safe in the neighborhood," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "How dedicated," she responded, and there was something in her tone that made it clear she wasn't buying our act. "Have a good night." The window closed with a final sound that sealed our fate. 3 days later, my life completely imploded. I came home from work on a Wednesday to find Sarah sitting at the kitchen table with an expression I had never seen before, a mix of disappointment, anger, and what looked like deep sadness. 2 suitcases were stacked next to the door. "Sit down, Vincent," she said calmly. I obeyed, instinctively knowing that our conversation would change everything. "Mrs. Patterson came to see me today," Sarah began, her voice controlled but tense. "She told me about you and the Miller boy." My stomach dropped. "Sarah? Please don't lie to me," she interrupted. "Not now. I at least deserve your honesty after 12 years of marriage." I looked at the woman with whom I had shared more than a decade of my life, seeing in her the decency and dignity that had always attracted me. And I knew she was right. She deserved the truth. "It's true," I admitted softly. Not the way she probably told it, but yes. "There's something between Jason and me." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, as if absorbing the confirmation of her worst suspicions. When she opened them again, there were tears there, but also a resolution that scared me. "For how long?" "A few weeks." "Do you love him?" The question caught me off guard with its simplicity and the complexity of the answer it demanded. I thought about Jason, about how he made me laugh, how his opinions challenged my thinking, how every moment next to him felt more real than anything I had ever experienced. "Yes," I replied. "I think so." Sarah nodded as if she had already known. "Then you need to choose, Vincent. Either you end this now and we work to save our marriage, or you go after what makes you happy and accept the consequences." "What if I choose you?" "Then we'll spend the rest of our lives knowing you stayed out of obligation, not love. It's not fair to me, and it's certainly not fair to you." The maturity of her response made me even more ashamed of my behavior. Sarah deserved more than a husband who stayed out of convenience. "I'm sorry," I said, knowing how inadequate the words were. "You didn't deserve this." "No," she agreed. "But I also can't pretend to be surprised. For years, our marriage has been more of a convenient partnership than a real romance." Her words were brutally honest, and we both knew they were true. "The suitcases?" I asked. "They're mine. I'm going to stay at my sister's house for a few weeks while we decide the next legal steps." 2 hours later, Sarah had left my life with the same grace with which she had entered it, silently, without drama, leaving only an emptiness that was quickly filled with a mix of relief and terror. On the same day, I found out that Jason's parents had received a similar visit from Mrs. Patterson. The explosion at 247 was apparently less civilized than the one at 246. Shouts were heard through the walls, doors slammed, and Jason showed up at my door at 11 at night with red eyes and a suitcase in his hand. "They kicked me out," he said simply. I pulled him inside, closing the door behind him, as if I could keep the rest of the world out. "They'll calm down," I tried to console him. Jason shook his head. "You didn't hear the things my dad said. He called me, words I won't repeat, said he doesn't have a son anymore." I held him as he cried, feeling as if my heart was breaking. This brilliant, kind kid had lost his family because of me. "Jason, maybe it's better if—" "No," he pulled away, looking at me with determination through his tears. "Don't say we should end this. Not now that we've lost everything." He was right. We had already paid the price, our families, our reputation, our life as we knew it. Giving up now would make all those sacrifices meaningless. A week later, I received transfer orders to another district. Apparently, the story had reached the ears of my superiors, and although there were no formal charges, they thought it best to reassign me to avoid further embarrassment. On my last night on Santos Dumont Street, Jason and I sat on the porch of my house, our house now, planning the future. He would finish college, I would establish myself in the new district, and we would build something real together, far from the judgmental eyes of those who couldn't understand that love sometimes appears in the most unexpected places. "It wasn't how I planned my life to be," Jason said, his hand intertwined with mine. "Neither was mine," I agreed. "But it's the most honest life I've ever lived." Jason smiled, that smile that had changed everything from the first day. "Then it was worth it." Looking at him, at the uncertain but possibility-filled future we had ahead of us, I knew he was right. Some things are worth any price, and true love, when you finally find it, is one of them. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this. What you hear here is just the beginning. The full stories, unedited and with all the details you can imagine, are available now. Check the link in the description right now. So, do you believe true love is worth any sacrifice? Tell me in the comments what part of this story touched you the most. If you want more stories that touch the heart, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell because there's new content every week. And don't forget to like this video if it moved you too.